In April 1943, an American bomber took off from a desert airstrip in Libya, flew a bombing run against Naples, and never came home. 15 years later, a British oil survey crew found her sitting upright in the Sahara, 400 miles from the nearest coastline. She was almost undamaged. The radio still worked. The machine guns still worked. There was food, water, and a flask of coffee on board. There was nobody inside her, and there were no remains anywhere near her. This is the Lady Be Good, and the desert held on to the rest of the story for another 2 years. The 9 men aboard her had arrived in North Africa on the 18th of March, 1943. They had been in the country for 17 days. They trained on the aircraft for a little over 2 weeks. Every one of them was flying his first combat mission. The pilot, William Hatton, was 26. The co-pilot, Robert Toner, carried a small pocket diary in his flight suit, the way a lot of men did. On the afternoon of the 4th of April, 25 bombers lifted off from a rough strip at Soluch, southeast of Benghazi. The target was Naples. They climbed away into a sandstorm that thickened as they went. Visibility collapsed, and the formation started coming apart before it had even left Libya. 8 aircraft turned back almost immediately. Others followed them. Lady Be Good was in the second wave, and she kept going. Of the 25 that took off that afternoon, she was the only one that never came back. What happened on the way home is the part nobody has ever been able to fully reconstruct. The formation had scattered. She was flying alone, at night, above unbroken cloud. There was no visible ground beneath her. No coastline, no lights, nothing at all to check a position against. At some point in the dark, they crossed the Libyan coast without knowing it, and then flew directly over their own airfield without seeing it. A radio bearing suggested they were close to home. It was the wrong reading. They trusted it, and they kept flying south. They flew on for roughly 2 more hours, into country with no towns, no roads, no water, and no landmarks of any kind. When the fuel finally ran out, they were hundreds of miles inside the Sahara. At 2 in the morning, they jumped. The aircraft did not fall out of the sky. She flew on, level and empty, with nobody at the controls, for miles. Then she came down flat onto the hardpan, slid along it, broke into 2 pieces, and stopped. And there she sat, upright and almost intact, in the middle of a gravel plain that nobody had any reason to cross. Back at Soluch, she was posted missing. The assumption was the obvious one. She had gone down in the Mediterranean on the way home, so the search went out over the water. It found nothing, because there was nothing out there to find. In November 1958, a British survey crew flying oil exploration work for the Darcy Company were mapping the edge of the Colancio Sand Sea. They reported an aircraft on the ground, hundreds of miles from anywhere, in a place where no aircraft had ever been recorded. A ground party reached her the following year, and what they found made the story stranger rather than simpler. She had been lying in the open for 15 years, and the desert had barely touched her. The paint had gone chalky, and that was very nearly all. The machine guns still fired. The radio still worked when they tested it. One of the engines could still be turned over by hand. There were ration tins, a canvas water container, and a vacuum flask of coffee that the men who found her described as still drinkable. Flying jackets were still stowed. Cigarettes were still in their packets. Personal kit was lying exactly where it had been left, but the parachutes were gone from the racks, and there was nobody aboard her at all, alive or dead. Which meant that at 2 in the morning on the 5th of April, 1943, 9 men had stepped out of this aircraft into the dark. It took another 15 months to find any of them, and the search covered thousands of square miles of open ground. In February 1960, a survey team working for the same oil company found 5 men lying together, 130 kilometers north of the wreck. Scattered around them were wallets, flashlights, first aid kits, and pieces of parachute silk, and a small pocket notebook. Robert Toner had written in it every day for 8 days, in pencil, in lines that get shorter as they go. That diary is how we know what happened. They had come down scattered across miles of desert, in complete darkness, with no idea where they were. They found each other by firing their revolvers into the air and sending up signal flares, and then walking toward the sound. 8 of them came together. The 9th, John Worovka, never answered, and they searched for him until they could not afford to stay any longer. Between the 8 of them, they had half a canteen of water. That was everything they had to drink. They started walking north because they were certain the Mediterranean was somewhere ahead of them and could not possibly be far. The coast was more than 400 miles away, and every single mile of it was desert. And the aircraft they were walking away from still had water on board. For the first day, the diary is almost conversational. They expected to be found. They write about the walking, the cold, the wind. By the 3rd day, they were sharing the canteen a drop at a time, and Toner had started recording how little was left. They walked at night when the temperature fell away, and lay through the days under scraps of parachute silk pegged over hollows in the sand. On almost no water at all, they covered something close to 80 miles. On the 9th of April, 5 of them could not go any further and stopped where they were. The 3 strongest kept walking north into the dunes to try to find help and bring it back. Toner kept writing for 3 more days after the others left. The final entry, on the 12th of April, is 8 words. No help yet. Very cold night. Guy Shelley was found more than 20 miles beyond the point where the others had stopped. He had kept going, alone, on nothing. Harold Ripslinger was found further out still. Vernon Moore has never been found at all, and the search for him was formally closed in 1960. John Worovka was found 12 miles from the wreck, still in his flying suit, with his parachute still attached to him. It had not opened properly. He had died on the night they jumped, while the other 8 were out in the dark calling his name. There is a story attached to this case that the wreck was cursed, and that parts salvaged from her were fitted to other aircraft that later came to grief. It gets repeated in a lot of tellings. There is nothing behind it, and the real story never needed the help. 9 men on their first mission, in a sandstorm, above cloud, at night, working from a radio bearing that was wrong. They did everything they had been trained to do. They jumped when the fuel ran out. They found each other in the dark. They walked toward the sea. They were simply 400 miles further from it than anybody could have imagined. And the desert did the rest. If you want to see the next case history can't fully close, subscribe.